25%, but in the eastern parts, where you see the yellow here, they were black majority. So large numbers of Africans being brought into the colonies, into North Carolina, and they are being smuggled out still using the same route, because remember, they still never got all their kinsmen back. They couldn't get all of their women and children back, so they have descendants who are still enslaved throughout the Carolinas, and they can't get them back, but they want them back. And they will continue to want them back throughout the 1700s into the early 1800s. Tuscaroras scattered throughout the back country of Virginia. They're going to get pushed into the Shenandoah Valley, but you got, you all can see that map of Tuscaroras, right? Can you see Tuscaroras in the Piedmont laying against the mountains?
Yeah.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. And I know you can see it in this one. You see the brown for the Tuscaroras in the Piedmont, Guilford County, Forsyth County, right on the hills, on the foothills. Y'all see that big brown spot? It says Tuscaroras. Okay. And then the rest of the Iroquois Confederacy to the north. You can't see this one, I know, but if you could read this map up close, you would see, again, the dividing line, which is North Carolina-Tennessee line, between the Northeast Indians and the Southeast Indians over the issue of slavery. And you'll see Tuscaroras in eastern Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in New York, and of course in Virginia as well, but you can't see that up close. And then all of these roads and routes in the western part of the state, you still got the same routes they're using. There were Indian trading paths and Indian roads, and they're going to be used by the Indians to basically smuggle people, their people, out of the South. While I got this one up, I'll go back to South Carolina. South Carolina helped in the defeat of the Tuscaroras in eastern North Carolina. Barnwell, who lives on the Gullah Islands down near Charleston, took hundreds of Tuscarora women and children as slaves back to his island. Tuscaroras came down from New York State down through Virginia to attack the Yamasees and to attack in South Carolina to get their people back. And then they used the route to go back through North Carolina to take their people back up to Pennsylvania and back up to New York. So all of these western roads and eastern roads, I mean, the Indians knew them well. They had traveled them for hundreds of years. They knew the way, they knew them well. They taught the Europeans the way, and they would come back to the South to get their people because they could avoid being detected because they were very stealthful, and they were coming back to the plantations to basically get their people back. So you got the Six Nations in New York State, and the Indians aligned with them, the Mingos and the Shawnee. Mingos are basically mixed race people. They're triracials. There's Seneca, can be Seneca and Tuscarora, but Mingo is usually identified with mixed race. So a lot of mixed race people end up in eastern Ohio and in the Ohio Valley, but they're using those routes to come down to get their people, and in the process they're taking Africans as well, because they will not return runaway African slaves. Okay? Here's an example of a runaway slave ad. I highlighted in yellow the references. It says Anthony is about 25 or 26 years of age. He's 5'8", 10 inches. Light is a mongrel, white, Tuscarora, and Negro. Has a tolerably large,
Aquiline.
what's that? White line? Slackline, nose, bushy hair, though sometimes he cuts it short, has a scar on one of his cheeks, when in a good humor has a pleasing countenance, but if intoxicated, the Tuscarora comes out. Okay. My point is, the slave population of North Carolina was mixed. Even into the 1800s, they were mixed. And they knew the way to get back to their kinsmen. And they were constantly trying to get back to their kinsmen. Forrest Hazel, who was a researcher for the Hallawasaponi people, passed this on to me because he knows that I have some Tuscarora ancestry and am very interested in Tuscaroras. And he gave me this from the state legislature. A delegation of Tuscaroras came down around 1828 or 29, and in the italics here, they say, "We come first to look up the small remnant of our nation, which we find much scattered from where we left them, and some few of our blood that are mixed with the black people. which brings them into bondage by your laws, which is a great grief to us, and will be to our nation if we are forced to leave them in this state of bondage. The point I'm trying to make to you all is that there was a relationship between the Quakers and the Six Nations, a very friendly and long-standing relationship between the two. So before we get to the official Underground Railroad and the assistance of Africans to run to freedom, and when they run to freedom, where are they going? They're going to New York and they're going to Canada. They're going to areas and territories and going through areas and territory like Windsor, Canada, that Native people have settlements in and have control over. Windsor, Canada, I point out, is like Windsor, North Carolina. If you know anything about Windsor, North Carolina, you know Bertie County, North Carolina had Windsor and Lewiston. Windsor is the capital for county seat of Bertie County, and that's where the Tuscarora Indian Reservation is and was. And Windsor, Canada was founded by Tuscaroras who settled in Windsor, Canada. The first street, if you look at the first street, the first main street that was established in Windsor, Canada, is called Tuscarora Street. And it was established by Tuscaroras and grew to be a great city. In Lewiston, New York, near Niagara Falls, New York, which is part of the Underground Railroad, and people are being smuggled out through Niagara Falls, Canada, Niagara Falls, New York. The Lewiston Reservation is the reservation for the Tuscarora Nation. The Tuscarora people are in Lewiston, New York today. And that's where their reservation is. So it's important to understand that these relationships, that even as slavery developed into the 1800s after the Revolution and after the establishment of the Republic, and we have firmly established the slave-holding regions of the country and the non-slave-holding regions of the country, I wanted you to see and understand the relationship that Native peoples had with this and how they influenced the establishment of these boundary lines between slaving people, nations, or states, and non-slaving states. And that relationship between the Native Americans, Africans, and the Quakers throughout this particular period. In fact, it appears that one of the reasons that the Quakers were encouraged to settle in Guilford County and the Moravians were encouraged to settle in Guilford County is because that was the dividing line between the territories controlled by the Five Nations or Six Nations and the Southeastern Indians. And since they were still waging war well into the 1750s and 60s against the Catawbas and the Cherokees, they wanted a buffer between themselves. And the Quakers were that buffer. The Moravians and the Quakers both tended to be pacifists. They both tended to not get engaged or involved in these activities, and they were both good friends of the Six Nations. So that is it. This map just illustrates Moravian settlements in eastern Ohio and Pennsylvania and New York, and it shows you the Moravian settlement in Winston-Salem, because the Moravians and the Quakers, from my work, are similar, and their attitudes were very similar, and they are, basically working with the Indians in the same way. But again, it does not take away from what this is all about, which is about the Quakers and the impact of the Quakers on the development of the Underground Railroad. So I'm going to turn the lights back up. I know I'm out of time, but